All right, good morning. My name is Gary Matsuoka, and we're here at Laguna Hills Nursery in Santa Ana on a Saturday morning. This class is on everything to know about gardening. We already did the soil, so it's everything else you need to know about gardening properly. So the last 2 weeks, we've been really talking about dirt and how any farmer would dream of having a white sandy soil, such as what is called sandy loam. And that is the ideal soil. It's not something made out of ground up wood. So everybody seems to want to sell, our industry seems to want to sell you ground up dead trees, either ground up bark or ground up wood. They let it rot for a while. And they said, here's this rich brown to black dirt that they want you to try to grow plants in. And for most people, it just fails. There's a few plants that can tolerate it, but most plants don't like to grow in dead trees. And we've found this out about 30 years ago, well, more than 30 years ago, 32 years ago, we were told that the soils we were selling were totally wrong. And we, after doing a lot of our own research, we agreed plants did best in pure sand and when in a container. So we, at that time, stopped selling organic potting soils and made our own soil that's mostly mineral. So our top potting soil, which is sold at over 20 locations, mostly in California, is 60% mineral, 65% inert, which means it can't change. Most potting soils are about 10% to 0% inert, which means that they really change over time. They shrink because they're decomposing, and a lot of times they take the plant's roots with them. So that's the big issue we face. Now, if you use the right soil in your garden, then what I'm telling you is going to make sense. But if you use the wrong soil, a lot of these things don't make any sense. So they made a lot of rules about irrigation back in the 80s because plants, in the 1980s, they introduced organic soils. So soil without really any soil in it, the organic soils, and plants were rotting. And for some reason, our academia couldn't figure out that it was actually the ground up wood and bark that was causing it. They said we're all over watering. So we had to figure out in the 80s when we're still in the dark, we had to figure out all these new watering schemes to not kill the plants, which is to make sure that they got totally dry before we watered them. And to this day, our industry still tells you you're overwatering, you got to let the plants dry out. Most of the plants we grow come from climates that get 40, 50, 60, even 80 inches of rain a year, or even hundreds of inches, and the soil never dries out. So there's something wrong with that. Even some of the plants that we're growing that normally live in water, the alocassias, the elephant ears, they were rotting on us. And that just didn't make any sense because those things live in water. But they don't live in ground up dead trees. There's no ground up dead trees in a pond. That's such a artificial medium. When your tree dies, it doesn't grind itself up into a million parts and decompose within 3 to 5 months. Trees that stand there dead for decades or even centuries and slowly decay in the environment, they don't grind themselves up. So something totally wrong with all the planter mixes and potting soils that are being sold. Anyway, so if you get the right soil, then watering, too much water is no longer an issue. You can water plants as much as you like, as long as the water doesn't sit there in a little pond for a long time, you're not going to hurt your plant. I remember my last house, total clay yard. We had El Nino rains in the late 90s, and my pomegranates were sitting in a pond for 3 months. And I thought, boy, they're not going to do too well, but they did fine. They didn't mind sitting in a pond of water in clay soil. It didn't hurt them. So anyway, the main thing we need to know about watering is how little can you water and the plants still do well. So with production plants, which we're talking about vegetables, fruit trees, things you need to do something like roses, you want them to flower, you want your herbs to grow. We have to maintain the soil moisture in the ground as deep as their roots. So in previous classes, we mentioned that the roots of a plant aren't very deep because they have to breathe air. They do not grow on the ground. And if you have clay soil, it's like 8-10 inches down. It might be 1.5 to 2 feet, or maybe more than that if it's very sandy soil. But generally, they have to breathe. So on a production plant, you want to keep the entire root system moist at all times. You don't want them to think that their soil is drying out below them. Because if the soil starts to dry out, they just shut down. They won't do their normal production. They may abort their crop. A lot of things they do to save themselves when they think the soil is getting dry. So the main thing is to maintain the soil moisture as deep as the root system is. And for most soils in Orange County, it's about 1 foot. And the only way you can check that, because those moisture meters that are sold, little battery-powered ones, they're too sensitive. If you ever use one in your garden, you'll notice it'll stay wet until it's dead. When it finally says dry, the plant's already dried up. Those are meant for indoor plants or plants in containers where you got to get them dry. Well, you don't have to. Again, if it's in our soil, you don't have to. But in the organic potting soils that we used to recommend, it's got to get bone dry so the air can get back in there, because the water in those pots doesn't have any oxygen in it. The compost has used it up. So in those cases, it's got to get bone dry, and that's why they made those moisture meters like that. But farmers have always used something that similar to this. Now, a lot of farmers nowadays have computers that tell them how much to water, but there's still farmers around that do the old method where they just walk around the field and see how far they can stick this dirt in the ground by hand power. And generally, if soil is moist enough for the roots to get water out of it, you can push it through it. Just like a piece of modeling clay, when you're in kindergarten. If the clay is wet, you can push anything through it. If it's dry, you can't push anything through dry clay. And the same goes with the ground in general. If it's moist, you can push this thing through it. If it's not moist enough, you can't do it. So you water generally from the top. And generally, if you can push this in the ground by hand power to about 1 foot to 1.5 feet. So farmers like to work mostly between 1 foot and 1.5 feet. So if you can push it somewhere between 1 foot and 1.5 foot deep by hand, your watering is on time, is adequate. If you can't push it in more than a few inches, your plants are running really dry. Because I've had people bring in samples of their lawn that the soil on top looks like mud, but their grass is totally brown. And then you look at the bottom of that piece they brought, and it's bone dry. So it would look like mud for a couple inches because they're watering the way they're watering, but it was so dry down deep that the lawn just was going dormant. It wasn't killing it, it was just going dormant on it. So the grass is used as a standard way to measure watering. So grass, they say, has a grass lawn coefficient of 1. And they measure other crops compared to grass. So like avocados, it's 80% as much water as the lawn needs. And there's some crops that go lower than that, but most of your crops, are going to be in that range, 80%, 70, 80% of what grass actually needs to stay green. And again, if you can push it in about 1 foot to 1.5 feet into your dirt, you're good enough. If you can push it in 2 or 3 foot, like 1998, we had something like 32 inches of rain that year, and my lawn was in totally clay, but I can push this all the way to the handle. I was just amazed, and it just goes right in. It was solid clay. So that's how you measure adequate watering. Now, how much to water and what the frequency is. So in agriculture, the information we're getting is that the more frequently and lightly you water, the more efficient the watering. So, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, the irrigation method was open the floodgates and flood the field. And they would do that once a week. And then in the 1980s and 90s, they started creating better irrigation methods, drip system and all that. And from that point on, the farmers started watering pretty much a lot of the small crops every day, a lot of the fruit tree crops every 2 days. But all the research we got last year from Florida, from Brazil, they're experimenting with watering 3 times per day instead of 2 hours. They were using their drip 2 hours every 2 days. They said, well, let's go 20 minutes 3 times every day, which is exactly the same amount of water. And they said, boy, the results were significantly better. Water real light dosage constantly. In fact, 20 years ago, we had read about a farm in Sacramento, water 18 times a day. They have computers set up, evaporation pans, so they can confirm the results. And they water their vineyard 18 times a day. He said, every hour it's above 80 degrees, they will compensate for the water the plant used with the drip system. And they said they saved 30% on their water bill, no loss in crop. So light, frequent. UC Davis in the 80s said, well, what's that going to do to the root system? We think it's going to make it more shallow. So they actually did that test where they did half the orchard once a day, the other half the orchard once a week. Same watering system, just more water once a week. And then they dug the trees out of the ground at the end of the year and found out that the trees that were watered every day had significantly deeper roots than the trees were watered once a week. And they said, we weren't expecting that at all. But that's what is true. You water lightly daily, you get better roots. Deeper roots, bigger roots. They said there's no disadvantages to watering lightly constantly. No disadvantages at all. Now for plants that aren't production plants like California native stuff, just hedges, let them go dry. You're not really wanting them to grow much anyway, so you can let them go dry. You don't have to water, but if you have a production area, light, constant watering seems to be the ideal. Now, if you're using sprinklers, the thing to know about sprinklers is that most sprinkler systems put out water way too fast than the ground can absorb. So the water district, say when you water a lawn, so the schedule for watering a lawn, so lawn irrigation for Orange County. In January, it's 4 minutes of watering per week. It's what they say that lawns typically need in January. In July, 44 minutes per week. And they said that also with most sprinkler irrigation systems, the max amount of water they can absorb on a sprinkler, 4 minutes. After 4 minutes of irrigation, you start getting runoff into the street, or you get runoff into the low areas, so the water is distributed now unequally if you water for more than 4 minutes at a time. So they recommend 1 4-minute irrigation per week in January and 11 in July. So this means you're watering every day, essentially twice a day in the middle of summer to keep the lawn wet. Now, again, the nice thing about grass is it comes from an area of the world that's not wet every season. That's why grasslands occur and not forests, because a lot of forests needs water year round. So grass is used to having a drought. So they said, the research they did at one of the research facilities in California said that all the lawn grass is being used can go totally brown, dry for 3 months, no damage. Which means grass is actually a good plant to have in your garden. It's totally drought resistant. I mean, it's very drought resistant. You can turn off the water entirely for 3 months. Now, your homeowner association may not like you for that. That's the problem. We have these crazy homeowner associations that expect you to, our yard to look like a tropical paradise year round when it's not. But any lawn we know of, you can just turn off the water, let it turn brown for 3 months, and then start watering again, and it recovers once you get the moisture back down to a foot. So when I was doing this on the lawn, I wanted to see what the reactions were. So we noticed that when I can push it in, 12 to 18 inches, the lawn looked perfect. When you're down to about 10 inches, you start getting this little, where the lawn just doesn't spring back after you walk on it very well. It just kind of limp. And then when you get down to 4 inches, you start getting a lot of brown in the grass. And then when you get any lower than 4 inches, the lawn just turns brown. It goes to sleep. And back in the 80s, I didn't know this stuff. In the mid 80s, when I had my first lawn, I planted my first lawn from seed. And to get seed started, you water it 3 times a day for 5 minutes. And it looked great. And then I switched it to 20 minutes twice a week, because I thought that's what we're supposed to do. Which is, 20 minutes twice a week. That's a lot of water. That's 40 minutes per week. I think I did it 3 days a week. So 60 minutes of water, a lot of water. But I started developing all these brown patches. I'm going, wait a minute. This doesn't make sense. It must be bugs. So I sprayed it for bugs, didn't see any result. He said, well, it must be fungus. So I sprayed it for fungus with fungicides, and nothing happened. And these spots are starting to grow. I'm going, okay, I'm just going to switch back to my seeding water, which is 5 minutes 3 times a day. And in 2 weeks, the whole lawn was green. I'm going, okay, there's something to know about watering that I don't know. And that's when we found all this information about how to water. University of California has all this information about how to water properly, and it wasn't 20 minutes at one time. It was 4 minutes at one time. So I did, it was still spring. I did 4 minutes 1 hour, 4 minutes the next hour. So you have to water at least an hour apart. So I set my sprinkler to go at 4 minutes at 6, 4 minutes at 7, 4 minutes at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I was doing it 3 days a week, and the lawn was perfect when I did it that way, rather than 20 minutes all at one time, 3 days a week. So that's the key with sprinklers. Don't leave them on too long. There's not a huge disadvantage watering any time of the day, because what the ag department says, if the water evaporates before the plant, it soaks into the ground, it doesn't evaporate out of your plant. So grass and plants evaporate water faster than a pond does, because they have more surface area. Here, grass lawn's got maybe 10 times the surface area as a pond. So it's evaporating water way faster than a pond is. And if you're watering at the heat of the day and it evaporates off the dirt before it gets into the ground, your grass didn't have to. So they said there's virtually no disadvantage watering in the heat of the day on a production area, because the water, your plant's using water so quickly that it doesn't, the evaporation off the ground is not as fast as the evaporation out of the plant. So you're stopping the evaporation out of the plant if it evaporates off the ground, or you're slowing that down. The only disadvantage of watering in the afternoon is the wind. So we usually have more wind in the afternoon. So they do say, watch that. If you have too much wind going on, then morning is better. The only disadvantage of watering too early is that some plants, if the leaves get wet and they stay wet for well more than 4 hours, then they can get diseases. If the water sits there without moving, that's when you get diseases. The water just hangs on the leaf for 4 hours. That usually happens when it's raining. or it's as humid as it is right now. So, but too much water is not really an issue with plants if the soil isn't overloaded with organic matter. So, yes.
Yeah, if you want to bring your soil to that constant level where you're continuously watering, do you want to do a deep water first or just go to the new method and let it take over?
I didn't hear the first part of the question.
If you want to keep the soil at a certain level with frequent watering, so if you're deficient in that, do you want to deep water first before you do that?
Yeah. So if you initially plant your yard, the ground may be totally dry all the way through it. So like a friend of mine who runs a farm, their fields are dry when they plant. So instead of using their drip system, they actually roll out these sprinklers that cover the whole field, and they'll water it for 5 hours. They said the first irrigation is the most important. They water for 5 hours each section, and that thing's slowly rolling through the field, watering the whole field to get it wet. They said that first irrigation is extremely important. You're going to get the soil wet 1.5 feet deep on most farms, and then they switch to their drip systems to do the rest of it. So, I mean, my dad was a contractor, landscape contractor when I was a kid, and they set up the irrigation to water the yard 5 minutes 3 times a day for 2 weeks. The first 2 weeks, 5 minutes 3 times a day to make sure nothing dried out. And then they'd go back and change the irrigation timer to, well, in those days they were watering about every 2 days. But now it's, the only disadvantage of watering real frequently is if you can get a lot of weeds growing. So you have to make sure you set up your yard properly. And I did bring some samples in here of mulches to put on the ground so you don't get the weed growth.
Well, what about evaporate stuff, like salts and stuff evaporating?
Yeah, that too. That's why we need mulches on the ground.
So that'll take care of it.
Yeah. Yeah, surface evaporation off the ground brings the water from below up, and that brings the salts to the surface, and they start
sitting on top of the mulch then.
No mulch. I don't know. You don't get much salt buildup with mulch on the ground. It really stops.
Oh, it doesn't happen at all. Oh, that's good.
Now I brought some hose, and just this is off the topic, but we've learned what so the top 2 rated hoses in the U.S. on the internet, at least. I don't know how accurate that is. The internet rated Viper hose #1 and Flexzilla #2. We love Flexzilla. We think this is the best hose we've ever used. We'll never probably go back to their hoses because the rubber on this is so soft. Like our other hoses, especially when it's on a cool morning, they're so stiff they knock over all the plants as we drag it through the yard. This is really soft and supple. This one, you can see they had a lot of thought to it, but in my house it kinks so badly. It's like, we don't push this one on anyone, even though
Are they both rubber?
They're partly rubber, yeah. So this one seems to kink real bad, so at least when my wife uses it. But now on any hose, just so you know, where the rubber connects to the ends, that's the part that's most likely to wear out. So when I'm pretty good at this, but my employees aren't so good. So when you have a wand or anything on the end of it, don't pull your hose by the wand or by the little trigger, the sprayer nozzle. You got to pull it by the rubber. If you pull it by whatever's attached to the hose, it tears it right where it's attached. I mean, this hose, the problem with this hose is last year we had a real hot day. I can't remember what day it was. I think it was in September. And I turned the pressure on, and I had a valve on the end of it. and it just blew the end of the hose off. Nothing tore. When this rubber is hot, it gets really soft, and it just came apart. So that's the problem. So now I water using this hose in the morning when it's cooler, but not if it's over 100 degrees with hot water in it. You know, if you leave this in the shade, no problem. But it was sitting in the sun. I turned on the pressure, and it just blew the end of the hose right off, because this is soft rubber. The 5/8 inch is a perfect size. We tried the 3/4 inch, but the rubber is way too soft to be that big. It kinked like crazy. This is their best size that they make on Flexzilla. Flexzilla, their main thing that they did before hoses was tubing for, what do you call it? Air-powered equipment. So, okay, so 2 years ago when we had lots of snowpack, just to let you know, the water districts are telling the farmers, we got so much water in the rivers in the Central Valley, turn on your sprinklers, don't turn them off. We want you to get the water back down to the water table, get that groundwater up again. So they just told the farmers, you turn on your water, you don't turn it off. So all the fields 2 years ago were flooded, just kept underwater, which doesn't hurt the plants. Now they really, in the last year, they just had the vineyards do this. So the vineyards use the least amount of fertilizer. So they said with other crops, sometimes you get too much fertilizer in the groundwater. Vineyards use so little fertilizer that they now just tell the vineyards to turn on the water, don't turn it off, because you get less contamination groundwater in a vineyard than you do with other crops. Okay, any questions about irrigation? So adequate irrigation is the key. Too much water, once you get your soil right, is not an issue at all. So, okay, and next thing we'll talk about is nutrition. So in nature, how does this happen? 90% of all plants live off of dead stuff. So in nature, the ground is around established ecosystems. There's an average of 5 inches of dead stuff covering the ground. Mostly leaves, some twigs, flower petals, animal manure, dead things, other dead things. And it's called the duff layer. And again, it averages 5 inches deep. So in some areas, it's feet deep. One of my friends went down to Guatemala and wanted to see how deep the leaves piled up underneath wild avocado trees. He told me it's 5 feet. I still can't believe that. He said they dug through 5 foot of dead leaves before they hit the dirt. We know it's pretty deep around some of the oaks in the foothills of the Sierras, because they used to gather all that up and sell it as oak leaf mold, all the dead leaves underneath the oak trees. So anyway, it's a pile, mainly a pile of leaves. The air can get through there pretty good, so it keeps the roots happy. But the way nature recycles this, the main method is there's this fungus in the ground that's attached to the plant's roots and goes up into the dead leaves and decomposes them. It's called a So in Spain, underneath the oak trees, it's a fungus called a truffle. You've all heard of that. So, and there's fungi for just about, I think they said 95% of all land plants use the mycorrhiza fungus to break down the dead leaves and put the nutrients back into the roots. So we've been taught, we were taught 40 years ago, oh, it's the bacteria in a compost pile. Well, it's not as major as the fungus doing it. And the fungus can actually do it faster than the bacteria in the compost pile, because the bacteria in the compost pile eat up the dead stuff, but it doesn't make it to the plants until that bacteria dies. It's got to die, and then the dead bodies give the nutrients back to the soil. Whereas this mycorrhizal fungus, its job is to break down the dead stuff and put it right back into the plant. And they said that that symbiotic relationship's been there since plants came onto land from the ocean. That's when it started. They said the algae from the ocean couldn't eat the rocks, but the mycorrhizal fungus can do that for them. So the mycorrhizal fungus got the minerals out of the rocks and partnered up with the plants. What the mycorrhizal fungus gets from the plants is sugar. So plants make sugar in their leaves. Sugar is what makes up. So wood, I don't know if that's real wood, is sugar molecules that are rearranged so we can't eat them. But plants are generally made out of sugar. Cellulose strands is sugar molecules. The stuff that holds that together is also sugar molecules. So most of the structure of a plant is sugar. Most of the structure of a fungus plant is also cellulose. So they get the sugar from the tree's roots to make its own body so it can grow. So the fungus is breaking down all the leaves, takes the minerals out of the leaves and gives them back to the plant. And they said that can happen in 90 days. They did studies with the radiated carbon or minerals, and they said that got back into the tree within 90 days, which they said is usually faster than it does in a compost pile. So after we heard that, we said, okay, I'm not going to use my composter anymore. Just grind up the dead stuff and throw it back underneath the plants. And we noticed it disappeared just as fast as it did when we composted it, or even faster. So, yes.
Once you add mycorrhizae, does it sustain itself then and increase?
Well, since Consumer Reports ran an article in the 90s said buying mycorrhizal is like buying snake oil because it's there.
It's okay. So then would it decrease if you don't keep a layer of compost? Would it starve?
I understand.
So would the fungus itself continue even if you don't keep a layer of compost or a layer of mulch?
It's there.
It won't die out for lack
What
of...
can they said if you scrape off a parking lot, if something's in a parking lot for 30 years, yeah, there's no mycorrhizae underneath there, but the spores from the fungus float in the air,
Okay.
so it repopulates pretty fast.
Add it to your compost and have it...
You can add it, but it needs to be connected to a plant root to do anything. So I talked to a researcher from UC Riverside, and she was up at Mount St. Helens after it blew, because that was like a huge devastated area. I don't know what it was, 200 square miles or whatever it was. No mycorrhizal. So they wanted to see how fast it took the mycorrhizal fungus to repopulate that entire area. And they said it only took 5 years for the mycorrhizal to repopulate that entire area around the volcano. So it comes in pretty fast. Now, if you plant something in a pot, in our potting soil, there's no mycorrhizal fungus in it. So we do sell it.
Changers.
Dr. Earth used to put in all their fertilizers. Unfortunately, they went out of business. And I think putting mycorrhizal fungus in every single fertilizer they made was probably a mistake. I mean, it's great for us, but it probably costs them too much for the benefit versus the actual benefit, because you only have to add mycorrhizal to a pot one time. It's going to be the rest of its life. And generally in your garden, you don't have to add it at all. I don't know how many, I don't recall the number of different species of mycorrhizal fungus there are around the world. I think it's in the neighborhood of 100 types of mycorrhizal fungus. And they said most plants don't care which mycorrhizal fungus they attach to. There's a few plants that care. So we know that azaleas need a specific mycorrhizal fungus, and their relatives do too. Azaleas and manzanita plants are related. And they said that the mycorrhizal that azaleas need doesn't package well. So I remember this was in the 1990s. I was fertilizing my azaleas with the Dr. Earth azalea food, and they weren't responding. The leaves are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. They're losing their leaves. I called up, so I talked to Milo, the guy from Dr. Earth. He told me, yeah, the mycorrhizal fungus for azaleas doesn't survive in our bags very well, so you may have to use a chemical fertilizer on your azaleas for now. So I put a chemical on them, and they just grew right back. They were fine. Interestingly, on the other side of my yard, the azaleas on that side were doing fine without any help with the chemical fertilizer. So they were on those. I don't know if that grower azaleas was inoculating their azaleas with the mycorrhizal. At that time, we're just learning about mycorrhizals. Not all the growers were inoculating their plants with it. I think most of them do now, the ones that need it, special ones. So just the dead leaves on top of the ground are adequate. Of course, if you don't have dead leaves, you got to get something. And if it's a front yard, you don't want dead leaves in there. And generally, garden maintenance people don't like to see dead leaves. They'll just blow them away, and that's all your fertilizer going into the trash, into the dump. So you have to get something. So when I was growing up, we only had simple fertilizers. That were fertilizers that weren't mixes of different things. They're just one item. So when I was a kid, I remember my dad had, we don't do this anymore, but he had 100-pound bags of fertilizer. It's like, I don't even see 100-pound bags of fertilizer being offered anywhere anymore. But they were these huge bags of blood meal. I remember he had three. He had blood meal, he had cottonseed meal, and he had bone meal, which we don't push as much as we used to. They said that cow's bones take about 5 years to become available to the plants. So it's like, okay, no use even doing that one if it takes 5 years. But these are simple fertilizers, just one ingredient in each one. Ground up cotton seeds, ground up, just dried cow's blood. The other real popular simple fertilizer we had was sulfate of ammonia, or ammonium sulfate. Just a chemical made, the reason why we had ammonium sulfate is because they used this stuff to make bombs in World War II. There are so many bomb factories around the U.S. making ammonium sulfate and ammonium nitrate primarily for bombs, that it was real cheap to get this because all the factories were already set up, and they make it out of petroleum. So this was really cheap back in the 50s and 60s, and it's still fairly inexpensive, but it's just one mineral in there. So let's talk about that a little bit. So I gave you a sheet that has all the minerals that plants are made out of. Carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, iron, chlorine, manganese, boron, zinc, copper, molybdenum, nickel, cobalt. 17 listed. We think silicon might also be in the mix, but we're not sure. So that's 18 total. Now, the top three, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, are either in the air as carbon dioxide or in water. So we don't have to think about the top three. But this is 45% of a plant, and that's 45%, and that's 6%. So you see, that's already 96% of the plant is water and air. So nitrogen, 1.5% is the most important thing we have to worry about. Potassium is 1%. Phosphorus is 0.2. So these are considered to be our macronutrients, although calcium should be one of them also because it's 0.5. It's actually higher than the phosphorus in the plant. So calcium should be also considered a macronutrient, and all the rest are essentially micronutrients. Well, magnesium 0.2, sulfur 0.1. Here we get into the micros, 0.01 on iron, 0.01, 0.005, 0.002, 0.002, 0.0006, 0.00001, and less than that. This in silicon, we're not sure. So soil is silicon. So up until recently, when they started growing plants in hothouses and didn't use any dirt at all, they found that if I sprayed silicon on the plants, they did better. Well, just grow them in what they're supposed to be grown in, which is silicon dioxide. That's dirt. So that's kind of a funny one that some farmers found in hothouses. The crops look a lot better if we actually spray real dirt on them. So anyway, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen are the minerals that make up sugar molecules, which is C6H12O6. So carbon dioxide, CO2, and water, H2O. You combine those in the chloroplasts in the plant, and it changes it with the energy of the sun to C6H12O6. And then the plant rearranges it to make cellulose or wood. So that's the main thing plants are made out of. Now, nitrogen is important because it's the cell membranes. So cellulose is the cell walls. That's thicker than the cell membrane. But on us, our cell membranes are whatever you touch is the cell membrane. So our hair, our skin, every cell in our body is surrounded by a cell membrane, and that's got a lot of nitrogen in it. So that's why you need the nitrogen. It's the thing that encloses the cells, the cell membranes, the nucleus membrane. All the membranes in us have a lot of nitrogen in them. So to get any growth at all, you need the nitrogen if you don't have it. Of course, we need the water and the carbon dioxide too. Potassium is the main salt in our blood. It's also the main salt in plant sap. So it doesn't have any specific job except it balances out the fluids in a plant. It makes the fruit juicier. So if you're lacking potassium, you don't have very juicy fruit, but you don't have enough sap in your plant either. So it's important for the balancing the fluids to have that potassium. Phosphorus is the molecule that stores energy. So plants store energy in the form of sugar, but when sugar breaks down, when the body breaks down, when plants break down sugar to do something, it's temporarily stored as a phosphorus molecule. So if you've taken biochemistry, you know the terms ATP and ADP. And those are the molecules that are throughout our body that store the energy when we break down sugar or any type of fat molecule. It stores it temporarily as ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And then when your muscle moves, it uses the energy off that ATP, turns it to ADP, adenosine diphosphate. The phosphorus molecule is taken off it, and it releases energy to do something. So phosphorus is an energy transfer molecule. It doesn't promote flowering. You need everything here to promote flowering, and you need everything there to grow roots. You can't leave anything out, but phosphorus is the storage and transfer of energy. And it turns out it's one of the hardest things for plants to pick up out of the dirt on their own. So, calcium is a major part of wood. So on some plants, they have a lot of calcium, and calcium is also needed to finish off a lot of different fruits. Tomatoes get that blossom end rot, as do peppers, as do cucumbers and squash. If they don't have enough calcium in the fruit, they get that black tip. The rest of these are not as heavily needed, but a lot of them, like iron and manganese and zinc and copper, seem to be part of the chlorophyll molecule that changes energy from the sun and makes, it's part of that enzyme chlorophyll that does all the work. So if you're missing iron, your plant's not as green because the chlorophyll molecule can't be made. Or if you're missing manganese or zinc or copper or molybdenum, your plant is just not as green as you should be because it doesn't have enough chlorophyll molecules. And they said most of these other metal minerals that the plant has are involved in some kind of enzymes in the cells that do something. Not needed for structure, but needed for, they have some job in the cell to do it. It's interesting, nowadays, we don't push iron anymore like we did in the 1980s. Everyone was putting iron on their plants to get their plants greener. And what all it was doing was turning your sidewalks rusty. Because iron is a micronutrient. And we don't see as many commercials for humans either. Iron for blood. It's just not needed in huge amounts.
Iron deficiency anemia.
Yeah. That used to be a big thing in the 80s for plants and people. But we rarely ever recommend iron for plants anymore. It's just generally, if you use the wrong fertilizers, you can throw everything off and they'll look anemic, but it's not usually an iron problem. So if you get an organic fertilizer, now, seed meals like cottonseed meal is one of the ideal fertilizers, especially for young plants, because everything in the plant seed is what that baby plant needs to grow. So this isn't really missing anything. Seed meals, there's cottonseed meal, there's alfalfa seed meal, there's soybean seed meal, there's neem seed meal. All these seed meals generally have everything plants need. So they're pretty good fertilizers. Blood meal is just the nitrogen. So on these fertilizer containers, they have to list it in the big numbers are nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And we were sent a letter by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which they send to all farmers, saying that the ratio between those three numbers is similar to this. It's like 714, 624, 625. It's similar to this ratio. So they recommend, that's what you need. Now the problem we have in when you're dealing with soil is that soil holds on to some minerals and not others. So most of these minerals stick to real dirt quite well, except for nitrogen. Nitrogen's too mobile. So in the ground, if you water a lot, it just flushes it away down deep. It doesn't stick to the soil particles too well. Or it turns into ammonia, evaporates in the air. So when you smell chicken manure, you're smelling a lot of ammonia. It's evaporating and it's going. You're going, okay, the nitrogen is leaving. I can smell it. So, so nitrogen, you always have to apply. The other minerals, once you have them, they don't move very fast. So that's one of the problems. You might do this initially, a well-balanced fertilizer initially, but in 5 years, all you need is something with the first number, because everything else is staying put.
If I use this organic fertilizer in my garden, I'm missing the COH or sugar.
Right, you getting that from water and
I
air.
have to apply sugar to the garden house.
No, the plants, that's the job, that's what plants do. They make sugar. That's the whole thing that a leaf does. Its only job is to make sugar.
The sugar feeds the microbiology.
It feeds the mycorrhiza, yeah.
Mycorrhiza and the bacteria.
But the plants are made out of sugar. The tree is pretty much 95%, well, there's a lot of water in the plant. So the dry parts of a plant, the non-water thing, is mostly sugar or cellulose, which is rearranged sugar. So that's what a plant is. It makes its own sugar. So that's one thing you don't have to apply. Now, what's interesting is they will absorb it if you apply it. but you don't need to. That's the plant's job, is to make sugar out of carbon dioxide and water. So what's interesting is now that our carbon dioxide level is 4 times what it was about 100 years ago, the plants don't need as much water. So the way plants would get carbon dioxide, so the bottoms of the leaves have these little holes that open and close. If the carbon dioxide in the leaf tissue is going too low, they open their holes till it brings the carbon dioxide level up again.
Yeah.
And then they close down again. But when the holes are open, they're losing water like crazy. So they don't want to open the holes that often. And what they found in the last 60 years now is the plants are making fewer holes in their leaves. They don't need them, because the carbon dioxide level is 4 times what it was 100 years ago. So they don't need but 1/4 the number of holes in their leaves to pick that up. And they said the Sahara Desert is greening up because the plants can get by with like 1/4 of the water they used to. So the deserts are greening because of the carbon dioxide in the air. So they've noticed that over, a lot of plant fossils from millions of years ago, they noticed that when the carbon dioxide levels were higher in those days, because it used to be 10 times higher than it is today, the plants wouldn't have any holes in the leaves. And at some points, hardly any carbon dioxide in the air. The plant fossils have a lot of holes in leaves that bring in the carbon dioxide. So it does change with the carbon dioxide level.
If the microbiology in the soil is correct, the microbiology is using oxygen and passing off carbon dioxide.
True.
So the holes on the leaves are underneath the plant, so that the carbon dioxide from the bacteria, the mycorrhiza, can rise up through the plant.
Well, that's true. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure if there's a significance to that. The holes are on the bottom rather than the top.
As long as there's carbon dioxide coming out of the soil, they're going to pick it up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they have to.
I don't know is carbon dioxide heavier or lighter than oxygen and nitrogen? I don't know that.
I think it's light.
But yeah, the source is pretty much from the ground.
Right.
All the dead stuff decomposing on the ground.
Coming up the carbon dioxide.
Right. So it does make some sense.
That's an amazing technique that been created. Fascinating bunch.
Okay, so and we know that it takes a while for certain minerals to make it into the dirt. That's why they say a lot of times when you're fertilizing your plants, like a vegetable garden, they want you to dig a hole next to the plant and put it in there, because we found that potassium only moves through the soil if you put it on the top of the dirt. about a half an inch a year. It moves downwards. It sticks to the soil, so it's not moving down as fast. But because of that, it'll be in your soil in the root zone for a generation before it passes through the root zone and is lost. But I remember once my neighbor had a palm tree in her lawn that was really potassium deficient. But I didn't want to dig her grass up, so I just sprinkled it on the grass. It took 3 years to fix her palm, but then it was fine for the next 20. By putting the potassium just on the surface. So now phosphorus is the hardest one for plants to pick up. It's the mycorrhizal is real good at that. But if you get a chemical version, not an organic, but a chemical version of potassium, and you overdo it, you start killing your mycorrhizal fungus. The mycorrhizal is real sensitive to water-soluble phosphorus because in nature it's not water-soluble. It's locked in. So there's fertilizers. Let's pull this off. So there's a famous fertilizer that landscapers and gardeners like to use called 15-15-15. And it's a chemical fertilizer. It's totally water soluble. It's hard for plants to pick up phosphorus on their own, but there's so much in here that you put on a 15-15-15 onto any garden and everything looks like it's suddenly, oh, it's a lot healthier. It's a lot greener. Everything's perking up. But if you keep on using that much soluble phosphorus, what you end up doing is you end up killing off all the mycorrhizal fungus in the ground. And then your plants just go way downhill between fertilizing because they can't get anything on their own anymore. You've killed off the mycorrhizal. So we have to be careful with these chemical fertilizers, anything with high phosphorus. Like in the 1980s, Miracle-Gro was 15-30-15 because they know that real high phosphorus number made the plants look so good. But apparently they learned, or they were told, that high phosphorus 15-30-15 is going to wipe out nature in the ground. So they really backed off and they made it the lowest number of the three. So they did a good job in the late 90s by changing their formula from the mycorrhizal killer to one that wasn't so bad. So that's the bad thing about chemical fertilizers, is that phosphorus number. It can really do a number on the mycorrhizal fungus. I mean, we use chemical fertilizer in the nursery. It's just more convenient for us. We know that in the long run, if I was any plant at my house in the ground, we use organic, or you put the dead leaves underneath it and it's happy. But for our own purposes, we use chemicals here because they start working faster. We primarily use Osmocote, which is 15-9-12, and that is the most widely used fertilizer in the nursery industry because it doesn't pollute as bad. So we're working in containers. Our problem is we're working in containers and things tend to flush out the bottom. And then you pollute the rivers and then nearby. So the organic fertilizers, which are great in the ground, you put them in a container with holes at the bottom and it flushes through in about a month. I mean, my dad told me when I was a kid, you water your plants every day, you fertilize them every month, which was a pain. This is a slow release chemical that lasts 5 or 6 months. So it just makes it a lot easier for us. The EPA did a study on this. They wanted to see how much was escaping into the rivers near these farms or near the nurseries. And they said, we were surprised. Not much is getting out. They're very happy with the use of this Osmocote as a fertilizer in containers and nurseries. They said not much. Now, a lot of nurseries in California, they're totally covered in plastic. All the water drains to a draining pond, and then they capture all the fertilizer that they're using, because a lot of nurseries don't use this. They use water-soluble fertilizers that are sprayed on or injected into the plants, but they don't let anything into the nearby river. They just collect it all and reuse it.
No question.
Mm-hmm.
If you buy a nursery plant like a flat of broccoli, and you don't use it right away, you discover it has worms on it and they start eating away, and then you put the BT on them and everything's fine. But you've got these plants that look really bad, right? So do you put the ozonite on them or do you put a liquid on them?
Well, Osmocote and water-soluble liquids work immediately.
Yeah, right.
The organics take, if your soil is established, if you have a garden and you've been gardening it, these work pretty fast too in an established garden. But if you have a recently planted pot and there's nothing living in there yet, these take about 2 or 3 weeks to get
I'm
going.
referring to nursery pots. They send you flowers and stuff, and they use peat moss. Of course, everything's got peat moss in it.
Right.
And so to make the plant recover quickly, you would want to use a liquid fertilizer rather than
Something that's water soluble, yeah.
yeah, because
faster.
6 months for it to break down. So,
Well, these can break down in just a few weeks.
624 breaks down.
We usually see, when we plant anything here, we always use this first. But when this runs out after 5 or 6 months, we'll switch to one of these organics, and we'll see results in just a matter of weeks. Especially if it's warm. The warmer the soil is, the faster the fertilizers work.
Can you take the 624 and soak it in water before you use it? I mean, to make
Yeah, but I don't like soaking anything in water for a while because you can make that water go oxygenless if you put organic matter in water, and then you put that water on the plant and you're suffocating the roots.
Yeah.
So I'd rather just see it on the ground. So now let's see if I brought it. Okay, so nature, I've told you that this is perfect soil, but in nature there is something called black soil. And it's not this is not black. So the rich black soils of the world that are both rich and black are rich and black because of a charcoal content. And that happens a lot near volcanoes. So charcoal is made when wood is superheated, or any plant material is superheated, but no oxygen. So the plume out of a volcano is 5,000 degree carbon dioxide. Things can't burn. They just turn to charcoal. So around a lot of the volcanoes that are explosive volcanoes, like in Italy and stuff, the soil is rich and black because of all the charcoal. Charcoal doesn't break down at all, but it holds on to minerals like crazy. That's why we use charcoal filters. All the minerals get stuck to it, and the plant's roots can get it off the charcoal. So it makes the soil both rich and black. And they said that the rich black soils of the world have a charcoal content of less than 1% to maybe 2.5%. And that little amount of charcoal makes the soils look black. And they're not sure why it does that, because it's so little in the soil, but it makes it look black. And they said in the jungles of South America and Central America, you'll see an area of the jungle that's a big circle that's really greener than the rest of that area. And you'll dig down about 2 or 3 feet and find a campsite from 10,000 years ago, where the charcoal just built up from the big logs that they were burning. Charcoal is expensive to make because it takes a lot of energy, although if you're in a third world country, they allow you to do it cheaply. So what they do, like in Vietnam and areas where there's no EPA, is you gather all your crop stuff, like sugarcane leaves and all that you're not going to use for anything else, and you set it on fire, get it really hot, and then you just bulldoze the dirt over it so there's no more oxygen. So it's really hot, no oxygen. Some of it turns to charcoal. A lot of it's ash, which is not permanent material, but whatever is still burning, not burnt, completely burnt yet, you cover with dirt, turns to charcoal. And then you get rid of that carbon dioxide forever. Because charcoal, unless it burns, charcoal can burn, but if you just incorporate it into the soil on your farm, it won't ever turn back to carbon dioxide, and it'll help with the nutritional level of the soil. There's another product that you can get that's cheaper than charcoal because it's mined out of the ground. That's this thing called granular humic acids, also known as the leonardite. Leonardite is a big coal deposit in Texas. So it's essentially the same thing. It's plant material. It's primarily bark that got buried and heated up to high temperatures. So now it's inert and it acts like charcoal. So a lot of fertilizers have this material in them. In fact, a famous fertilizer that's out there is Grow Power. It's all this where they add chemical fertilizers to it. So it's an organic base that holds the fertilizers in place. Charcoal is real expensive to make because of the energy involved. So I was watching one of those shows on TV where they're making charcoal. They put all this wood into these kilns, and it's totally enclosed, and they have to heat it up to incredibly high temperatures to make that charcoal. So the soil in Orange County, our natural soil, has a lot of minerals in it, so you don't have to add all these. We are high in phosphorus. The native soil here is high in phosphorus. So if you're gardening the ground, you should never have to add that. They said we have about double the phosphorus as the plants need. So you don't have to add it. We have no nitrogen, but that's normal throughout the world. There's no nitrogen in the ground. Potassium, we're a little bit low. Most of the other minerals were not too bad. So at my last house I owned, I added a lot of potassium initially. We have boxes of pure potassium on the shelf. And never had to add it again. Now, one thing to know about fertilizer is that it's not an energy source for the plant. So it's like we eat to make ourselves more energetic because we don't make any of our own energy. Plants get energy from the sun. This does not make them stronger. You feed a plant, you're not making it stronger. You're actually making it weaker. Because this is building material. You're telling the plant, okay, here's some stuff to build stuff out of. So fertilizer actually makes the plant weaker, not stronger. So if you have a plant that's really struggling, you can just let it sit there in the sun for a while, even if it doesn't look pretty. It's just sitting there gathering energy. Any green part of the plant can gather energy from the sun, and it gets stronger. So back in the 80s, we were looking at an interesting article, California Rare Fruit Growers magazine, talking about getting plants stronger so they can fruit better and flower better. Someone from the Rare Fruit Growers lived in, which is a local organization that specializes in growing fruit trees. They lived in Palos Verdes. They said, we're so cloudy here that our lemon tree never ever flowers. It's just too dark. Formula that a university was using back east to grow cuttings, hardwood cuttings of trees with leaves on them. They said the problem they had was that these cuttings were losing all their carbohydrate reserves before they finished making their roots. So they created a formula to spray on these cuttings so they can finish the root system that had carbohydrates in it. So this was the formula that they had found. It's molasses fish emulsion and seaweed. That's what the university had put together. The molasses is the sugar, which powers up the plant, and it also its main thing that plant needs to build itself is sugar molecules. The fish is the nitrogen for membranes, and the seaweed is a growth hormone to make it get going, make it grow those roots. And essentially it was 1 ounce, 1 ounce, 1 ounce per gallon of water. So the homeowner in Palos Verdes sprayed it on the leaves in the fall. So most fruit trees, they grow in the spring, they grow in the summer, in the fall, they sit there and gather energy to store sugar for next spring's crop. So they sprayed it in the fall with this formula here, and they said, we got fruit. So this is back in the 80s. I saw that, I'm going, okay, I got to try this. So I had an orange tree that had grown for 5 years but never even bloomed. So we sprayed this combination on the tree 6 times in the fall, which is every 2 weeks. And the next year I had 200 oranges. Well, I'm going, well, the tree was already 5 years old. Maybe it was due to bloom anyway. So I can't say that's a perfect test. But I had a plum tree that was, maybe 12 foot across and 15 foot tall that was making about 5 plums per branch. So what I did is I just took that formula. We just sprayed 1 branch 6 times that next fall. And then the next year, that 1 branch had 25 plums on it. We're going, that seems to work. The rest of the tree was only getting 5 plums per branch. This 1 branch was totally loaded up. We're going, that works. We also found out that this combination of stuff is what the guys who grow those 2,000-pound pumpkins use. They said without, especially these 2 things, they can't break 500 pounds. They need that. They need to cheat. They can't inject anything to the pumpkin to make it heavier, but they can apply this to the foliage constantly to make them have more strength and energy and stuff to build that pumpkin bigger. Plus, they usually put lights on their pumpkin plants at night.
Yeah.
So
there's a pumpkin festival at Irvine Park this weekend, and they have the 1,500-pound pumpkins out there. It's a big contest. Who has the biggest pumpkin?
right. So this is an interesting thing to do. I mean, we spray our nursery almost every week from spring through fall for bugs. We always stick the molasses in there because we've seen what molasses can do for plants. It makes them stronger. We usually use the seaweed too. I don't put the fish emulsion because the neighbors next door don't like the smell. But what we do is we add a water-soluble fertilizer, 15-5-15, to that mix. Whenever we spray anything, we're making the plants grow faster and bigger.
Is there any benefit to increasing what you do with the 3 chemical or the 3 substances? Like if you mix those 3 together with worm castings and compost in a bucket and get a tea out of it, would that enhance the?
I don't like the teas at all.
You have
to be careful with them. Yeah, well, once you put something that is like worm tea is a lot of bacteria action.
Right.
That's consuming all the oxygen in the water. If you take that water without aerating it properly and pour it on the plant, you can kill the plant.
You have to put a pump on, air pump on.
Right.
I do that.
It's got to be well aerated, and even when you're pouring out, you got to make sure it's aerated well.
Yeah.
Because you store.
About, 2 days.
Anytime water is sitting around in a container for a while, it can lose all its oxygen.
It gets kind of stinky.
So what the rules are that our water districts have to follow is the water out of your tap has to be 5 to 7 5 to 7 parts per million oxygen. So there's 5 to 7 molecules of oxygen for every million molecules of water, because that's what fish need to live in water. That's what roots of plants need to live in water. We can't live in that. We need a lot more oxygen than that. But that's, they have to make the guarantee that the water coming out of your tap has that much. So some mornings I turn on the faucet and you notice the water is real milky. They aerated that water. They put a lot of air bubbles into it, because you watch the water and all those little bubbles rise to the top and then the milkiness is gone. So they had to aerate it to get the oxygen level up. Any questions on fertilizer?
Do you know if molasses is acceptable for organic, certified organic?
I have one over there called Mendocino Gold, which may be more organic than this one. I don't know.
But I mean, the product itself would be okay as opposed to, there's so many things you're not allowed to use it if you want to be certified organic.
Right.
Molasses itself is not oil unless it's not an organic molasses. Is that
Right. You can buy molasses at the supermarket.
Yeah.
Or carol syrup at the supermarket. Just use table sugar. But yeah, if it's not certified organic, you're not supposed to use it.
Okay.
Although I don't know how anyone can ever check up on you,
Right.
because there's no residue.
Zero interest in being certified organic. I just wondered if it's acceptable.
Aside from the aroma, can you use all those three with pesticide?
Pardon?
Aside from the aroma, can you use those other three ingredients with a pesticide?
Yes. Yeah, most pesticides are fine. So whenever we're spraying anything, except for oils, I don't like to mix oils with other materials. But the other pesticides, and we don't use many, we use mostly spinosad here, which is an organic pesticide.
And you have to make sure you're using the right amount, so you have to gauge for that. Right? If they recommend certain mixture, you have to transpose that.
Oh yeah, the pesticide, yeah, we have to follow the rules that way. Okay, so I did bring my garden straw in here, but garden straw is one of the best mulches to put on top of the ground. Dead leaves is ideal. We sell bark, which is not that natural. You don't see, in the forest you do see bark falling off of trees on the ground, so I guess it's okay. So we sell, 3 grades of fir bark, cedar bark, redwood bark, and then we sell wheat straw. And wheat straw would be the most similar thing to plant leaves that you can put on top of the ground, but it doesn't look good in the front yard, but in a vegetable garden, it's great. So it more resembles real leaves than anything else we sell. And the main reason, of course, you want the organic matter there because nature wants to break that down and give it back to the plant roots. The other thing it does, though, it insulates the temperature. So soil is supposed to be very insulating, but it needs help. So what they found in the orchards, if you have bare dirt and it's 90 degrees that day, a foot deep, it's 120 degrees. That's way too hot for roots. Roots like to be around 80 to 90 is ideal for roots. If you put 3 inches of mulch on top of the ground on a 90-degree day, a foot deep, it's only 87 degrees. It's perfect for the plant roots. So plant roots do not like bare dirt around them. You see roses this time of year in people's yards that have bare dirt around. The roses just look absolutely cooked. They hate that hot soil around them. So if you don't have mulch on the ground, plant plants around them. Some kind of ground cover to keep that ground from heating up. That's really important. So in a vegetable garden, some vegetables like it hot, but most farms use artificial mulch. They'll put on black plastic, which does keep the soil cooler. Clear plastic makes it really hot. Black plastic radiates the heat off the ground. It doesn't make it through as well. clear plastic they use on farms that grow strawberries here in the winter because it makes the ground just really hot. Yes.
For the, what kind of mulch would you recommend, that would be like less fire friendly? Like when you put bark mulch around your house, the fire people recommend not doing that.
Right. Well, everything that's organic burns. That's the problem. If the fire is hot enough, it'll burn anything. I mean, if you have a fine leaf mulch and you get it real wet before the fire comes close, that's about as good as you can do. But all organic materials can burn in a hot fire. That's the problem. So, and that is a disadvantage. I mean, the house I'm living at now has a lot of gravel mulch. That insulates the soil too. But I'm not fond of gravel, but that's just what I have right now. So.
I like about that straw mulch is a reflection against
Yeah, we like the straw mulch a lot. If it wasn't shipped from Canada, it would be more environmentally friendly. I don't know why we can't source straw mulch or wheat straw from local. The only company we have that ships it is in Canada. It's like, oh well.
But there be herbicides on that, especially local.
No, they guarantee it's clean. Yeah, we can get two grades. There's farm straw and there's garden straw. If you get the farm straw, it's a lot cheaper, but it's got a lot of wheat seeds in it.
They discontinued some of those farm straws at feed stores because they said people were buying them.
I don't know the reason for that. Okay, so the best mulch you can have, of course, is your own plants. So all the farmers, the next generation of farmers, the new generation is being told, we got to stop throwing away the crops. It's like we were next to an organic farm. We leased land from an organic farm for 4 years. Every time one of their crops was done, they would have this 40 cubic yard dumpster. And they would fill it to the top with a few acres of dead plant material. And they'd haul it off, and of course it gets recycled at the dump. But they're telling the farmers, you got to find a way to save that on your farm because that's your fertilizer going to the dump.
Right.
That's all your nutrition going. So the newest generations of farmers are trying to figure out how to do this. Now there's a lot of farms already that are doing it, but it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of complicated because they said they have these big warehouses where they take all the stuff and they grind it up and they put it in big compost bins in the warehouse. And then the next spring they take it out into the fields and spread it out. There's, on small farms, there's some farm, well, like in the 1950s, this farm in Japan, this guy that used to be a pathologist, a botanist, pathologist, he decided he'd go back to his dad's farm and figure out how to make things simpler. So they grow rice in the summer, and once they harvest rice, they just leave it on the ground, and they grow wheat in it. And when the wheat's done, they just leave all the dead wheat on the ground and grow rice in it. They just leave it there.
Chinese way.
Yeah, the simple way.
Yeah.
Don't clean your farm up, just use it. So we have to figure out ways, in a garden just to do that. Figure out how to save your dead tomato plants and plant your next crop in it.
I do that.
Okay.
I'm reading a book now by Rodell on composting, and he had a chart in the back of it. He has all these charts, biology charts. Okay, so I found out tomato plants have two components. One is nitrogen. All the green on the tomato plant that's left over has nitrogen. The stalks have carbon. I put all that in a 30-gallon trash can bucket, and I let it soak for about 2 weeks. This morning, I took that out and I put it in my garden. It's a natural fertilizer. It has full of nitrogen and full of carbon, which every plant needs. So you take all your stuff and the water breaks it down and brings out the minerals in the plant. So that's kind of funny. It's like dead stuff helps you make new life.
No, it's always been that way.
So
Well, we
it's
used to
the way
use
the world
manure.
works. Yeah.
We used to use human manure to grow plants.
So
We don't
let's
do that much.
use it.
Yeah. In fact, most of California, a lot of farms get human manure
Right. Yeah.
because all the stuff,
Chinese way again.
yeah, all the stuff from the sewage plants goes to the Central Valley. It's all being recycled.
There's stories about tomatoes sprouting.
Yeah, well, tomato seeds can handle
So that's
being composted and going through our digestive system. So yeah, you get a lot of tomatoes that way. Okay, where was I going with this? So anyway, try to figure out how to save all your dead tomato plants and get them going. Now, the last thing we'll talk about is crop rotation. So a friend of mine runs a huge farm operation in Orange County. It's Orange County Produce. They lease 200 acres of land here, and they're organic. They are on a 10 crop rotation cycle, which means if they grow tomatoes, they don't grow anything related to tomatoes for the next 9 crops. And the reason for that is that no plant likes to be where one just died. So if you have any plant, if you have a healthy tomato plant and you pull out of the ground, you've left 90% of the root system in the ground, which isn't much. It's only like 1% of the soil volume, but it's like killing somebody, chopping the human body into little tiny bits and spreading it all over your house. That's how serious it is to plant health and how bad, dead bodies are to humans too. It's this nasty to have a dead body next to you that's related. If you chopped up a fish and stuck it in your house, nothing happens. Chop up some dead flies, nothing happens. But if it's a monkey or a human that you chop up and leave the dead parts around your house, there can't be much in there. You'll make you sick. And it says the same exact thing to plants. So plants can't grow in the same soil twice as well as they did the first time. So I was 20 years ago, I was just seeing what happens in my yard. So we grew tomato plant in virgin soil one year. So we saw what 100% crop was. Replanted in the same soil the second year, and it was about 60% of the first year's crop. And the third year, it just turned yellow and died before it did anything. So we knew that by the third year, it was no use at all. So the that farmer was doing 10 crop rotation cycle. We leased land for 4 years, did not see him plant the same crop in the same plot at all in the 4 years we were there. So we know it took at least 4 years for them to go through their 10 crop cycle. You can get around that if you sterilize the soil. So you'll notice that there are farms near the freeways a lot that use the clear plastic on the ground. Those are the farmers that are sterilizing the soil with fumigant. So they put clear plastic over it. They gas underneath the clear plastic to kill off everything in the ground. So the ground is now sterilized from all diseases that were on the dead bodies from the previous year, and they can plant the same crop again. The ground sterile fumigants are getting harder to get, which is good. They're having to actually work with nature rather than against it. But just know that the farms that use the clear plastic are sterilizing the ground. The farms that use black plastic are usually organic farmers, although, there's not much organic about black plastic, but at least they're not using fumigants. They have to use black because if they use clear, all the weed seeds would just grow. So you can't, the black plastic keeps the weeds from growing. The clear plastic heats up the soil better. So they get, their strawberry farmers can get their winter strawberry crop to grow faster because that soil's hot, but they have to sterilize it in order to do that. So crop rotation. So on this back of this sheet, we put down the vegetable families that you have to rotate between. So like the Solanaceae nightshade family is your tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, eggplants. So if you have, so it's nice to have, you know, most people can't do this, but it's nice to have 4 beds in your backyard. So you put your Solanaceae or tomato, potato, peppers in one bed 1 year, and then the next year you put them in the next bed. The next year you put them in the next bed, and then the 4th year you put them in the next bed, and then you go back to the first bed. And that way you won't have any reaction from the dead plants from 4 years ago. And they do this with all plants. So our rose growers that do the bare roses on a farm in near Fresno, they say the roses are a 2-year crop, and then they grow other farm crops for the next 3 years before they plant roses in the same ground again. And our bare root fruit tree suppliers, they just put the fruit trees in different areas. So pears here 1 year, plums here the next year. They have to keep on rotating their crops to get them to grow. Those trees are a 2-year crop also. However, we know when now they don't sell bare root grapes anymore, but when they did sell bare root grapes, they would plant them in the same spot over and over and over. They did that because they said the first year you grow a grape in this virgin plot of soil, it just grows too big. It just grows 40, 50 foot across. We can't sell those plants too easily. But if they grow them, they pull those out, chop them up real good into smaller plants, and then sell them. The next year they put them in the same spot, they're not as vigorous. It makes them less vigorous. So they do that on purpose to get the grape plants to grow smaller so they can ship them better. Now we found out in Napa Valley, which is, you know, it's a waste of farmland, but in Napa Valley they only allow them to grow grapes, which makes sense. It's Napa Valley. But when the grapes get old after 30, 40 years, they can't grow anything there for a long time. So they pull out the old grapes and they just have to let the weeds grow for 10 years before they can plant new grapes again. You know, they don't really know what, a lot of the people who do this stuff don't really know what they're doing. They say, well, it's got to recharge the ground before we can put the grapes back in. No, you're letting the dead bodies rot away. And they said, and we've also heard from in the literature, this crop takes something out of the ground that is missing. So you can't put it back in because it's not there anymore. Well, yes, it is. It's the dead plant. It's still there. You didn't take anything away. You left the dead body there. And we know all the minerals. We can substitute any mineral the plant takes. We can put it back in. It's not that. It's just that it leaves behind dead bodies. So it's interesting in other fields of plant, like forestry, they noted that in North America, we have total stands of the same tree. But if you go down to Mexico or any of the tropics, the forests are really mixed up. There's not the same, like they said, you know, the Amazon forest, whatever that's left, the same tree will be only about every 70 yards in that jungle. And there's all these other different species of trees. That's because in the Amazon rainforest, nothing burns. And the only way to sterilize the ground is to have a really good wildfire. So they said in the temperate United States, you get a wildfire, it'll sterilize the soil about 1 foot deep. I think they said 10 inches, which is good enough. So you burn down a forest of fir trees, the fir trees can grow back from seed because the ground is sterilized. But in the rainforest, nothing gets sterilized. So they said there's hundreds of species of trees in this rainforest because whenever one dies, nothing can live within its root zone for decades, which, you know, they said these tree roots may extend out 70, 80 yards in all direction. So that's why they're that far apart. I was reading an interesting story of research that they're doing in Arizona. They said, so their theory was, with a certain ecosystem in this harsh climate of Arizona, there should be one plant that dominates. but they never found it. They found in this one valley, it was either mesquite or cholla cactus. They thought one of these should dominate because one should be better adapted to that harsh climate, but they never find it. They didn't figure out that when the mesquite dies, the cholla has to grow. And when the cholla dies, the mesquite has to grow. They can't live in the same spot twice. But they didn't understand that part of the research. They were just summarizing that you can't get an ecosystem with this one plant. And they didn't know why. So anytime, if you have a hedge of plants and one dies, you can't just put a new one in there. It won't do well at all. You have to dig as big a hole out to get rid of all those dead roots from that one plant that died and put in new dirt that doesn't have those dead roots. When you replace that part of the hedge, that's the rules for replacing a hedge. The rules in an orchard, if you have one tree that gets run over by a tractor, you can't just put a new tree in there. It won't live. Well, they said it actually declines in size for 5 years before it gets going again because of the dead body. They found out if they removed about 3 foot by 1.5 foot deep soil from another part of the farm that doesn't grow that same tree, then that new tree does really well in it. So you need virgin soil when you're replanting the same plants. So you can fill new dirt in here every year and plant the same plant, but it's hot. Or you can try to put a bonfire on there and sterilize it. I don't think you'll get away with that one. A friend of mine who used to grow seedlings for farms, they'd use the same sand over and over, but they would steam sterilize it at around 175 degrees to make sure it was clean before they started more seeds in it. So you can steam sterilize stuff. Now we can't do solarization here too well. So solarization is where you cover moist soil in the ground. You can cover these beds with clear plastic. They said it works if you've got 2 weeks of 90-degree weather, which we rarely get here. I mean, we get it some years, but we rarely get it. So you can do soil solarization in the Central Valley pretty easily because you're guaranteed 2 weeks of 90-degree weather in the Central Valley. You're guaranteed like 2 months of it there. So solarization doesn't work too well here. Now there is a concept of gardening called square foot gardening. We have a 4 square foot area divided into 16 parts where you put a different vegetable plant in each one of these. And the advantage of that is if you have a tomato sitting next to a cucumber sitting next to a carrot, the bugs and diseases can't figure it out. So you get fewer bugs and diseases when you mix it up, but then you can't rotate. Because these roots, well, this is just string that they put on top of this to delineate those. So the roots just grow in the next section. Well, what they had to do, so square foot gardening, what they did over the years they've been doing it, is they found out if they make the soil really light, when they pull the plants out, the roots come with the plant. So they're using vermiculite and perlite and compost as soil in this thing, so that it's so light that when they pull the plant out, the roots come with the plant. And that's the only way that thing can work. Because if the roots break off in the ground, you can't rotate. And eventually everything comes to a halt. So they had to modify their soil to allow them to get the roots out of there. Any questions on this?
So if you have, say, a couple like eggplants, pepper plants, they survive for 100 years, that would be your solution? Something like the method using there.
Yeah, if
For
you
surrounding plants,
well, if they're not related, it won't bother them. But
so not really. But say, if you had a couple that died off, you want to dig that up pretty well.
yeah. Something else came to mind, and I Forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah, the only way around doing this is to rotate the soil. So in England, this is apparently easier than in California because the soil is wetter there. So there's something called double digging. So in a vegetable garden, you have plants in the garden, the roots only go a foot deep, if that. So what they do in England, because they've got that real peaty soil, I guess, in parts of England, they just dig out the top foot of soil and throw it over here. And then they dig out the next foot of soil and throw it over here and reverse and going back in. So that all your dead roots are now down here and the soil up here is fine. I had one person do that because they were only growing strawberries every year. And they tried it. They said, I'm never doing that again. But he said it worked. But that's a lot of work in our drier soil. It's hard to dig it. But that's double digging a bed.
That kind of works good with raised beds too.
Yeah. One thing I didn't talk about the last few weeks. So we've had a lot of problems because of the concept raised bed. So raised bed is a bed that's connected to the ground that's raised up using blocks or wood, and the soil's on top of the ground. And there's another thing that people have called elevated beds, which are boxes that are built, but they're not on the ground. So that's an elevated bed, and that's a raised bed. One person asked me once, what's the best soil to put in a raised bed? And they actually had elevated beds. And I told them to get sandy loam or decomposed granite, because that's what we normally use. They had an elevated bed, but they said it was a raised bed. They filled it up, and it wouldn't drain at all. It just stayed too wet in there. So I have to always ask people now, is it elevated off the ground, or because the raised bed soil setting on top of soil, this soil down here just sucks all the extra water out. When you got an elevated bed, there's nothing sucking the water out of this dirt. The dirt's holding a lot of water like normal soils do. It just stays too waterlogged, and they couldn't grow anything in it. And then they sent me pictures, and I said, okay, that's not a raised bed. You just have to take it all out, put sand in it, or top pot, which is coarse, so it doesn't hold as much water.
I have a question. In the leaf bed, if the leaves have a disease or a deteriorate anything, is that a problem, just leaving that?
Generally, no. So in rose garden, so the question was, is disease leaves a problem in the garden if you keep it there? So what they said on roses, most of the diseases are no longer producing spores once the leaf hits the ground. So like rose rust, while it's attached to the rose leaf, it's releasing all these spores. They said once it's on the ground, the bacteria in the ground kind of consume the spores, and they're not really, the disease isn't as active as it was when it was still attached to the plant. So they said it's generally not a problem. I mean, we used to sterilize rose beds. So 40 years ago, we would get, and fruit tree beds too, we had lime sulfur, which they no longer allow on the market. But we had lime sulfur to sterilize the soil every year after we cut our roses back. And then University of Houston did checkup on that. He says, it doesn't seem to help at all. Whether or not we sterilize it or not, the disease spores are just floating in the air, you'll get them anyway. So sterilizing the ground didn't seem to do anything. So I'm sure if you have rotting fruit underneath your trees, you want to get rid of that because that's actively rotting. But a lot of the leaf diseases are not as active once they're on the dirt. So, yes.
I just cut down a tree and kept the leaves, but the leaves are just fine. But would those leaves equate to the fallen leaves?
Mhm.
Natural
Oh, yeah.
fall-off?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, anything you can get that died is worth something. everything that's alive has those minerals in it. All those minerals are in there, especially the leaves. Ground up wood is not as nutritious. Bark and wood is mostly carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, but the leaves are the gold for the garden. Anything green has got all those minerals in it. So, okay, thank you.